But first, coronavirus is spreading faster in Scotland than in many other parts of the UK. And to talk about that, we're joined from Glasgow by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Thank you very much for being with us. I just want to talk about the situation in Scotland when it comes to COVID-19. Cases doubling every 9 days. Across the UK, the doubling time is between 8 and 16 days. So that puts Scotland at the upper end of that. On Friday, the R rate in Scotland was between 1.3 and 1.7. That's higher than in England, suggesting that people in Scotland are spreading the virus more. Have you lost control of COVID-19 in Scotland?
No, absolutely not. And we're working hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Our number, the doubling time, the latest figures suggest, as you've just said there, that it is spreading a little bit faster, but our number of cases per 100,000 of the population are actually at the lowest level of all of the UK nations. And that is partly because over the summer we suppressed the virus to very low levels. So the rate of spread we're seeing now is from a much, much lower base. Now, that doesn't mean that we can be complacent about it or not take it very seriously, but it does show we were right to do that over the summer. And I think we're right now to act quickly and decisively to try to stop that increase in cases, which is why we took last week the very difficult decision to close down pubs and restaurants in the central belt of Scotland, but also restrict their operations in every part of Scotland. One of the things we learned earlier on in the year, I think we all learned this, was that speed of action against this virus is really important. Literally every day matters.
You say there that the virus level in Scotland went very low over the summer, which it did. So I'm really interested to know, why has it started to rise so sharply again? What's driving it? Is it students? Is it the fact that people really aren't obeying the social distancing rules anymore? What's going on?
In some ways, it's quite basic, and actually it's the phenomenon we're seeing in many other countries, not just in the UK, but across Europe right now. We suppressed the virus to very low levels because of lockdown. We then lifted lockdown a little bit more slowly than in other parts of the UK. But as lockdown measures are lifted and people start to interact with each other more, then the virus gets more opportunities to spread. We're also going into winter. We're not in the depths of winter yet, but temperatures are falling a little bit, so the conditions for the virus start to become more favourable for it in terms of the spread of it. We also, and this may have an impact on our slightly, and I want to stress slightly higher, our number. Scottish schools went back, as they do every year, earlier than in other parts of the UK, and we were determined to get schools back full time for the good of children and their education. And universities in Scotland go back a little bit earlier than other parts of the UK as well. So there's a multitude of factors there. But what is important is that we try to strike a balance between living as best we can with this virus, retaining some of the freedoms that we didn't have during the very strict lockdown, but still making sure that we're keeping it under control. We also have a very well-functioning test and protect system in Scotland, which is now bearing a lot of the strain of breaking the chains of transmission and keeping it hopefully under control.
Let's talk about the testing system, shall we? What's the weekday testing capacity in Scotland?
It varies. We have two strands of testing capacity. We've got the Lighthouse Laboratory UK-wide network, and the capacity there varies. But if you look at yesterday, for example, just under 20,000 tests were carried out in Scotland. We also have
what's the capacity, though? Just a straight answer. What is the weekday testing capacity?
So in a weekday, taking all of the different parts of capacity, it will be between 30 and 40,000 tests a day would be our
given
capacity.
It's between up to 40,000 a day, just looking at the number of tests carried out in Scotland, on Monday it was 15,000, Tuesday 13,000, Wednesday 17,000, Thursday 18,000, Friday 18,000. When we know the R rate is rising in Scotland, infections are rising, the virus is spreading, why on earth aren't you using the full testing capacity?
Well, much of the testing capacity, remember, is demand-led. It is people with symptoms, and that's what we want to ensure as we go into the deeper part.
You're using less than half of the testing capacity. You're saying that you've got a great test and trace system, but if you're using less than half of the testing capacity when the R rate is going up, when infections are going up, it doesn't sound like a well-beaten system to me.
with respect, I was about to try to explain it to you before you stopped me. We are building and have been building a testing capacity that is not just what we require now, but what we will require as we go into winter. So we want to make sure that we have that spare capacity as we go into winter. We are likely to see more people with symptoms, that may be symptoms of COVID or maybe symptoms of flu, so that we have that capacity then, because this is, to a large extent, a demand-led system. And of course, we have, in terms of the availability of tests, whether that's through regional testing centres, mobile testing units, the walk-through centres we've got, we have quick and ready access to testing. But we are also looking at expanding testing of groups in the population that don't have symptoms. So we already test people who work in care homes, we test groups of NHS staff, and one of the things I announced in Parliament just a few days ago is over this 2-week period we're looking at extending testing into other asymptomatic groups, and we're of course making sure that we've got the capacity to do that as well. What I was going to say is we have 2 strands of capacity, the Lighthouse Lab processing capacity, but also NHS Scotland capacity, where we are transferring care home testing to, so that we maximise all of the capacity we've got. But in terms of people understandably and legitimately say, why don't you use all of your capacity right now? We want to test as many people as come forward right now, but we also want to make sure as we go into the winter, we've got the capacity we will need then.
OK. Now, you mentioned a bit earlier in the interview the new restrictions that you've brought in Scotland to try and slow the spread of the virus. Of course, if people are to follow the rules, they need to really know what the rules are. And there has been a bit of confusion. Restaurants have been ordered to close, but not cafes. Genuinely, how do you know if you're a restaurant or a cafe?
I think most people know whether they're a restaurant or a cafe. There is a definition in the regulations. A cafe is somewhere that in the ordinary course of its business serves non-alcoholic drinks and light snacks or light meals. What we've tried to do here is put in place restrictions that can have the effect we want them to have, which is reduce the spread of the virus. Now, that means we have to reduce quite dramatically the volume of settings that people can come together and interact. Now, we've try to do that, but also build in a bit of flexibility, because we want people, particularly when we've got household restrictions in place, people can't go into each other's houses. People who live alone to have somewhere they can go to meet a friend for a coffee. So for social isolation reasons, we allowed cafes to stay open, and we've given a bit of flexibility so that a cafe that just happens to have a licence but doesn't really serve much alcohol can stay open rather than close. We can be a lot more simple, but that usually means being a lot harder. We're trying to strike the right balance here between controlling the spread of the virus, but allowing as much normality as possible. Leaders like me everywhere right now, it feels like we're holding lives in one hand and jobs in the other, and we're trying to strike a very, very difficult balance and do that as best we possibly can.
I can absolutely understand, the difficult balancing act that leaders across the world are having to juggle. You've been quite critical of Boris Johnson, though, for mixed messaging. So in May, you said clarity of message is paramount if we're to rely on you to know exactly what it is we're asking of you. As leaders, we have a duty to deliver that clarity. But then this Friday, you said the confusion over cafes, over alcohol, has resulted in a lack of clarity. But sometimes that's a price we have to pay right now for trying to be as flexible as possible. So is a lack of clarity unacceptable when it's Boris Johnson, but acceptable when it's you?
Well, in point of fact, actually, I've tried very hard not to criticise Boris Johnson, notwithstanding being invited to do so, because all leaders are making really horrendously difficult decisions. What I was trying to explain on Friday is that, just as I've tried to explain to you there, it is very easy to give 100% clarity by saying everywhere must close, everybody must stay at home. That is the situation we had under strict lockdown. As you try to strike a more nuanced balance, it does become more difficult, and there is more potential for a lack of clarity that we try to work through and give as much as we possibly can. I'm trying every day. Sometimes I'll do it better than others. I'm not perfect at this. Nobody is. But every single day I've chosen not to stop doing daily press briefings. I'm trying not just to say to people what it is we want them to do to keep the virus under control, but to share with people the decision-making process and the difficult balances we're trying to strike. And where there is a bit of difficulty with striking a balance like we had on Friday over cafes, trying to make people understand why that is and what the alternative would be. But, you know, I'm not infallible in this. It's a difficult situation, and we're trying to do it as best we can and strike those balances between controlling the virus because lives depend on that, but recognising the big economic impact of how we're having to do that and trying to preserve economic activity and as much normal life for people as we possibly can.
And of course, the sort of difficult decisions are made even harder when people in public life aren't seen to be obeying the rules. You've been very strong in your criticism of Margaret Ferrier, who you said that she needs to resign as an MP after she travelled from London to Glasgow while she was an SNP MP after testing positive, knowing she had tested positive for COVID-19. She said that she's not going to resign. You haven't expelled her from the party, though. So if she's not fit to be an MP, why is she fit to be a member of the SNP?
Well, we've suspended her from party membership. We now have a due process we've got to go through. I can't unilaterally decide to expel somebody. We have a process in the SNP, and that process will take its course. We've done everything in terms of our SNP membership that we're able to do at this stage, pending that due process. I don't have the power, and you know this, Sophie, no party leader has the power to make an MP resign from Parliament, but I couldn't be clearer. She should step down from Parliament. The lapse of judgment in travelling hundreds of miles knowing she had tested positive for COVID was so significant and so unacceptable that I don't think there is any other acceptable course of action for her. So I've read her comments in the media today, but I still hope she will do the right thing. Obviously, just as in the SNP's case, there's due process. There are House of Commons processes now that will be able to be deployed. I'm not in the House of Commons; they are not for me, but I know that they are processes that the House of Commons are able to go through. Every day I have to stand and ask people across the country to do horrendously difficult things, to not visit their loved ones. Right now I'm asking people to understand why they can't go to a pub or a restaurant, and it is unacceptable that somebody in her position flagrantly disregarded the rules like that, and I cannot be clearer about that. It is not acceptable and she should resign.
Now, I do want to talk to you about Alex Salmond, your mentor, someone you work very closely with, recently cleared of sexual assault. Important, of course, to emphasise that he has been cleared. But when did you first know that he faced these allegations?
The allegations in terms of what allegations, he was investigated under the Scottish Government procedure for complaints that came forward to the Scottish Government. He told me about those complaints. He told me in my own house. He showed me what he was accused of, and he gave me his response, including saying that he had to apologise for something previously. A few months before that, Sky News raised a query with the SNP about alleged misconduct on the part of Alex Salmond, so I knew about that then, and obviously I had that knowledge when the later complaints came to light. I've got nothing to hide in all of this. I faced a situation where complaints were raised about my predecessor, and the Scottish Government tried to investigate those complaints. It made a mistake in how it applied its process, and there's a parliamentary inquiry into all of that just now. But at the heart of this, and it pains me to say this because, as you say, this is somebody that I have worked with and cared about for a long time, and I know this is difficult for my party, but this all came to light because complaints were raised about Alex Salmond. He was cleared of any criminal conduct, but in the course of that, and again, this pains me to say it, there were admissions about his conduct made along the way, and that's what's at the heart of this. And it's age old, I guess, that when complaints are made against people, then there's an attempt to try to shift the story onto all being a big conspiracy, but this is complaints that were made about him, and that is important to remember.
The specific question was about when you knew about the concerns. You previously said you first found out when Alex Salmond told you on the 2nd of April. Now you say that 2018. Now you actually say you found out from his chief of staff.
No, these are Sophie. These are different. You're conflating two different things.
Just to be clear, when was the first time that you found out about concerns raised about Alex Salmond's behaviour?
you're conflating two different things. What you're asking me about and what I've been asked about before is when I became aware of concerns that were specifically raised with the Scottish Government that were then investigated by the Scottish Government. His behaviour is a wider thing than that. And what I've told you and what I've told the Parliamentary Committee that's looking into this is that in November 2017, Sky News raised a query with the SNP about allegations. I don't know who had made those allegations. I still don't know who made those allegations. That was about alleged, sexual behaviour on the part of Alex Salmond. I spoke to him about that at the time, but that was different to the complaints that then came forward to the Scottish Government that are now the subject of the parliamentary inquiry.
Do you think some people might think you're dancing on the head of a pin here?
No, because some people might. That's up to them. But I'm trying to frankly set out that you're talking about different things.
What we're talking about is allegations about the behaviour of a senior politician who was your mentor, your friend, perhaps. Important to say he was, of course, cleared from the charges. But some people might be asking why you haven't been completely upfront about when you were first aware of concerns about his behaviour.
I've just told you. I've just told you about the Sky News complaint. Now, at that time, this was a media inquiry that was made by Sky. Sky didn't run the story at the time. They raised concerns. I spoke to Alex Salmond at the time. He denied those. I couldn't do anything else about it at the time because I didn't know who had made the complaint. All we knew
You've said that you forgot when you first found out from his chief of staff.
No, I didn't say that. Alex Salmond told me later about the specific complaints that were raised under the Scottish Government process, and those were different to the query that Sky raised. I'm trying to be upfront here. This is not about my conduct. This was about Alex Salmond's conduct. What I've done at every stage is tried to make sure that the Scottish Government, not related to Alex Salmond, but generally in the wake of Me Too, which was around this time, that the Scottish Government had a process in place that allowed complaints or concerns to be investigated. And the Scottish Government, when faced with complaints about Alex Salmond, investigated those. Now, it seems to me, I seem to be variously accused of conspiring against Alex Salmond, colluding with Alex Salmond. All I've tried to do all along is make sure that complaints about senior people in politics can't be brushed under the carpet, as would have happened for generations. This was an issue of Alex Salmond's conduct here. And yes, he's been cleared of criminal charges, but there were concerns raised that suggest that maybe he didn't always behave in this respect as he should have done. I've tried to do the right thing all along, and I will continue to be upfront about that in the face of questions, as I've sought to be today.
According to the Scottish Daily Mail, Alex Salmond's team have told the inquiry that you haven't handed over all the WhatsApp messages sent between you after he was accused of sexual harassment. Why haven't you?
I've handed over everything to the committee that is relevant to the remit of the committee. I've gone back and checked, actually, haven't seen that. And I think I know what he's referring to, which I'd be happy actually to read to you right now if you want to.
Yeah, do.
Okay, so round about the time I spoke to him about the Sky News query, I sent him a message on the 5th of November saying, "Hi, when you free to speak this morning?" He replies saying 10 a.m. That's when I asked him, what is this Sky thing? I go back to him later that day to say, any developments? And the next day, I say, you free for a word? So I was setting up a conversation that I have told the parliamentary inquiry about. It's hardly a big revelation. Later that week, incidentally, I messaged him to say, no wonder you didn't want to tell me. That's just after I find out that he's agreed to host a regular show on Russia Today, and it reflects my incredulity at that decision. And I think his response to me then makes an oblique reference to the Sky News query. So, that may be what he's talking about. It's not a big revelation, really.
So why do you think that he's saying that these messages should have been shared then?
Look, you'd have to ask him that. I understand that for Alex Salmond, it probably is better for the focus of this to be on people wanting to believe that there was a big conspiracy against them, as opposed to the focus being on his conduct. I can understand that. I can understand why people in my party might want an alternative explanation for all of this. This is age-old here, that, man accused of misconduct against women, and often it's a woman that ends up sitting answering for them.
At the same time, though, you can see just taking a step back, there's been accusations, rightly or wrongly, that you haven't shared all relevant messages with the inquiry. There has been confusion, rightly or wrongly, about when you knew about concerns raised about Alex Salmond's behaviour. I can't help thinking if it was another politician, Boris Johnson, for example, you would be one of the people who would be criticising their conduct.
Well, the reason, I've put all of this to a parliamentary inquiry. I actually did it 2 months ago. The committee just published it this week, and I'm really pleased that it's published and it's out there. I will sit before this committee when it calls me to do so, to answer all and any questions. I've not actually been invited to do so yet. I've got nothing to hide here. One of the worst things that I've faced in a sort of political sense, because nothing's worse than the COVID stuff I'm going through right now, we're all going through right now, but in a political sense, one of the worst things I faced was being confronted with the reality that my predecessor, my mentor of 30 years, somebody I considered a friend, closer to me than probably anybody outside my family, was facing serious allegations of sexual misconduct. At every stage I've tried to do the right thing. And
just finally, Linda Fabiana, an SNP member of the Scottish Parliament leading this investigation into the Scottish Government's handling of complaints, says the inquiry can't currently proceed because of obstruction from, among others, the Scottish Government. So can you commit now to doing everything in your power to assist this investigation?
The Scottish Government has already provided thousands of pages of evidence. Scottish Government officials have appeared before the committee already. One of the things I did early on, because as you have just been demonstrating, part of the committee remit is looking at my conduct. Therefore, I recused myself from all of the decisions about the Scottish Government's response to the committee, because I didn't think it would be right for me to be taking the decisions about the evidence that the Scottish Government put forward. But the Scottish Government has been cooperating with the inquiry and will continue to cooperate with the inquiry. From what I read on the committee's website, one person who hasn't put forward evidence to the inquiry yet is Mr. Salmond himself. I have, the Scottish Government has, so we will continue to be cooperative and to do what the committee asks of us.
OK, Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much for coming on the programme today. Thank you.